To understand the British divide and rule approach in India, one must look beyond the surface of colonial history and delve into the intricate ways in which imperial strategies shaped and continue to influence the political, social, and psychological landscape of South Asia. At the heart of this policy was a keen awareness of India's diversity. Long before the British arrived, the subcontinent was a mosaic of languages, religions, castes, and kingdoms. Rather than forging unity, the British saw an opportunity in this complexity. By highlighting and institutionalizing differences, they could prevent the emergence of a unified opposition and maintain their dominance over one of the world's most populous regions. The British did not invent India's diversity. For centuries, the region had been home to Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Christians, and a multitude of smaller religious and tribal communities. It was a land where over 1,000 languages and dialects were spoken, divided further by countless castes and subcastes, each with distinct customs and social standings. The Mughal Empire, which preceded British rule, had managed this diversity through a blend of centralized bureaucracy and local autonomy. But the British, arriving as traders and later as rulers, recognized that such diversity could be manipulated as a source of power, rather than managed as a challenge of governance. Early in their rule, the British began to favor certain groups over others, often for reasons of administrative convenience or political expediency. For instance, in the Bengal region, they initially relied on upper caste Hindus for clerical and administrative roles. Meanwhile, in Punjab and parts of the north, they recruited heavily from Sikh and Muslim communities for the army, believing them to be more martial. By distributing privileges, jobs, and access to power selectively, the British fostered resentment and rivalry among groups that might otherwise have found common cause. This approach was institutionalized through a series of legal and political reforms. One of the most consequential was the Indian Councils Act of 1909, also known as the Morley-Minto Reforms. For the first time, this act granted separate electorates for Muslims, meaning that Muslim representatives would be elected exclusively by Muslim voters and Hindu representatives by Hindu voters. While this was presented as a means of protecting minority interests, it had the lasting effect of transforming religious identity into a formal political boundary. Religion, once just one of many aspects of social life, became a central axis of political rivalry. Another powerful instrument of division was the British census. The colonial administration undertook the first comprehensive census of India in the late 19th century, categorizing the population with a zeal for classification. People who had previously seen their identities as fluid and overlapping were now assigned to rigid categories: Hindu or Muslim, upper caste or lower caste, tribe or non-tribe. These labels, enshrined in official documents, hardened social boundaries and gave new meaning and new power to the concept of difference. The geography of colonial India also reflected this strategy. The subcontinent was not governed as a single, unified entity. Instead, it was a patchwork of British provinces, directly ruled from London, and princely states, nominally independent but heavily influenced by British advisors. This fragmentation served the British well, as it diffused potential centers of resistance and made coordination among Indian leaders more difficult. As the movement for independence gained momentum in the early 20th century, the consequences of divide and rule became even more apparent. Political leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru struggled to build a sense of national unity across lines of religion, caste, and region. Meanwhile, others, such as Muhammad Ali Jinnah, argued that the interests of Muslims could not be protected in a Hindu-majority India, a belief that had been reinforced by decades of political separation engineered by the colonial state. When the British finally decided to leave in 1947, the divisions they had fostered came to a head. The Partition of India, creating two independent nations, India and Pakistan, was justified in part by the claim that Hindus and Muslims were fundamentally incompatible as political communities. This idea, known as the two-nation theory, found fertile ground in the atmosphere of mistrust and competition that the British had helped to create. The result was one of the largest and bloodiest forced migrations in history. Approximately 14 million people were uprooted from their homes, and hundreds of thousands lost their lives in communal violence. Partition did not resolve the underlying tensions. Instead, it created new sources of conflict. The borders drawn by colonial officials, sometimes in haste and often with little regard for the realities on the ground, left millions of people stranded on the wrong side of the new lines. The region of Kashmir, with its mixed population and ambiguous status, became a flashpoint for war between India and Pakistan, a dispute that continues to this day. The legacy of divide and rule did not end with the departure of the British. In independent India, politicians have continued to exploit religious, regional, and caste identities for electoral gain. The system of separate electorates was abolished, but the politics of identity persists. Political parties often appeal to specific communities, promising benefits and protection in exchange for votes. Caste-based reservations in education and government jobs, originally intended to address historical disadvantage, have sometimes been used to reinforce group divisions. India's internal boundaries were also reorganized after independence, with many states redrawn along linguistic lines. While this helped to recognize the cultural diversity of the country, it also entrenched regionalism as a force in politics. Disputes over resources, language rights, and local autonomy continue to be sources of friction. Economically, the British legacy can still be felt in the persistence of inequality. Land tenure laws introduced by the colonial state created a class of large landlords in some regions, while dispossessing small farmers and tribal communities. The bureaucracy, modeled on British lines, has often been criticized for being slow, hierarchical, and resistant to change. Perhaps most importantly, the psychological effects of divide and rule remain powerful. For many, identity is still shaped by the categories and distinctions that colonial rulers emphasized. Suspicion and rivalry between different groups can flare into violence, as seen in periodic outbreaks of communal riots. The rivalry between India and Pakistan, fueled by unresolved territorial disputes and mutual distrust, has shaped the security landscape of the entire region. The echoes of colonial strategies can even be heard in the rhetoric of modern leaders. When politicians invoke the threat of the other, whether defined by religion, caste, or region, they are, consciously or not, drawing on a legacy that dates back to the days of empire. The tools of division, once wielded by foreign rulers, have been passed down to their successors. Yet, there are also stories of resilience and unity. Despite the challenges, India has managed to sustain a vibrant democracy, with regular elections and peaceful transfers of power. Civil society organizations, social movements, and ordinary citizens continue to work for greater inclusion and understanding. The memory of partition, with all its pain, serves as a reminder of the dangers of division. Understanding the history of divide and rule is not just an academic exercise. It is essential for anyone seeking to make sense of the politics of South Asia today. The boundaries, both literal and metaphorical, that shape the region were not drawn by accident. They were the product of deliberate policies designed to serve the interests of those in power. Recognizing this history allows for a more nuanced understanding of contemporary issues. It helps to explain why identity politics remains so potent, why border disputes are so difficult to resolve, and why calls for unity are often met with skepticism. It also points to the importance of building bridges across divides and of questioning narratives that pit one community against another. The British divide and rule approach in India was more than just a colonial tactic. It was a formative force that continues to shape the destinies of more than 1 billion people. Its effects are visible not only in the institutions and borders left behind, but in the ways people see themselves and each other. The challenge for the future is to move beyond the divisions of the past and to build a society in which diversity is a source of strength rather than a tool for domination. Only then can the full promise of independence be realized and the shadows of empire truly be left behind.